All right, today we are going to break down a really powerful algebraic technique. Seriously, this is a method that can solve any quadratic equation you throw at it, even the ones that look totally impossible to factor.
So let's start with a problem you've probably run into. You're staring at a quadratic equation, you're trying to factor it, but the numbers, they just aren't working. It feels like you've hit a wall. So where do you go from there? While the good news is, there's a universal key for these situations. It's a reliable, step-by-step process called completing the square. And the best part? It works every single time. So here's our game plan for this explainer. We'll start by looking at that factoring roadblock. Then we'll figure out what completing the square even means. After that, we'll walk through a 5-step guide, tackle some trickier equations, and then wrap it all up with a summary and some common mistakes you'll want to avoid.
Okay, so what are we actually doing when we complete the square? Well, the whole idea is pretty simple. We're just transforming the equation into a shape that's way easier to solve. At its heart, it's just a clever way of rearranging a standard quadratic expression. We're going to move things around until one side becomes what's called a perfect square trinomial. Something that looks like x plus p squared. This new form, well, that's the secret to solving it without breaking a sweat. And this is the transformation we're shooting for. See? We're taking that kind of messy expression on the left and turning it into that nice, clean form on the right. Because once you have something squared equal to a number, the solution is literally just a square root away. So, how do we actually pull off this transformation? Let's break it all down into a super simple 5-step process. We'll start with the most straightforward kind of problem, where the number in front of the x squared is just a 1. These are our 5 golden rules. We're going to follow them every single time. First, get the x terms by themselves. Then, find that special magic number to create a perfect square. Add it to both sides to keep everything balanced, factor it down, and then just solve for x. Easy.
Okay, enough theory. Let's get our hands dirty with a real example. We're going to solve x squared plus 6x plus 5 equals 0.
First things first, we follow step 1. Get that constant term out of there. We're going to move the plus 5 over to the right side of the equation, which of course makes it a minus 5. And now for the key part, step 2. We need to find our magic number. We just look at the coefficient of x, which is 6. We take half of it, that gives us 3. So what do we do with that 3?
We square it. And 3 squared is, you guessed it, 9.
This is the perfect number that's going to complete the square on the left side of our equation. And now we can just bring it home. We add 9 to both sides, got to keep the equation balanced. The left side now factors perfectly into x plus 3 squared. Next, we take the square root of both sides. And remember, it could be a positive or a negative too. From there, we just solve, and we get our two answers, x equals minus 1 and x equals minus 5. Great, you've got the core method down. Now, let's level up and see how to use this same logic on equations that look a little more intimidating, specifically when there's a number out in front of that x squared term. So what do we do with an equation like this one? 2x squared plus 8x plus 3 equals 0. That 2 at the beginning seems like it could mess things up, but there's a really simple first step that takes care of it. Here it is. This is the only extra step you need to remember. Before you do anything else, you just divide the entire equation every single term by that leading coefficient. So in this case, we're going to divide everything by 2. And just like that, our tricky equation becomes x squared plus 4x plus 3 over 2 equals 0. See? The coefficient of x squared is now 1. Now, it might look a little scary with that fraction in there, but don't worry. The process from here is exactly the same. You just apply those 5 steps we already learned to find the answer. All right, let's pull everything together and shine a spotlight on a few common pitfalls. These are really easy mistakes to make, but they're just as easy to avoid once you know what you're looking for. Okay, there are 3 big things to watch out for. First, if your a term isn't 1, your very first move has to be dividing the whole equation. Second, when you add that magic number, you have to add it to both sides to keep things balanced. And finally, when you take that square root, please do not forget the plus or minus symbol. That's the key to finding both solutions. So here's the big takeaway. You now have a tool in your belt that can solve any quadratic equation. It's a true universal key. But even more important is understanding the process, because it's the exact logic that builds one of the most famous tools in all of algebra. That's right. By understanding the logic of completing the square, you've actually uncovered the secret behind the quadratic formula. The steps we just walked through are the very same steps used to create that single, powerful formula that does all this work for you. And we'll be exploring that in our next explainer.